listening to LOA Recon with the Good Vibe Coach Jeanette Ma, where we dissect the ins and outs and the art and science of conscious creation, all intended to amp up your manifesting game. Let's have some fun together. On one of our recent podcast episodes, I was talking about how a friend of mine won a lot of rodeos. In fact, he won so often. It was such a consistent winner that was one of his primary sources of income. I mean, it helped put him through 8 years of school and supported his young family. I mean, he had some other things that he did for money as well, but he was a regular winner of rodeos. Anyway, when a podcast listener heard that, he emailed asking for details about how this friend of mine managed to be such a regular winner. So I went straight to the source and I asked him. And you know what? His answer could have come straight from the Conscious Creator Playbook. But before I share what he did, let's just establish how good he was at winning. It's not like he just won a couple rodeos. So I said to him, hey, for real, just so I'm not misrepresenting, how often did you win? I texted him the question and he texted me back and he said every weekend. And I said, no, not how often did you compete? How often did you win? He texted back every weekend. Or close to it. He says it was a rare weekend that he didn't at least place in the top 3. I was like, well, all righty then. Okay, so this guy's a consistent winner. In fact, he said, after I convinced him that I wouldn't think he was bragging, he said, when I showed up, people knew I was going to win their money. When he competed, they'd all come to the fence to watch him do it. Like he was really good at this. So I asked him, how did he get so good at it? And he attributed it to his mental game. And here's how he elaborated on this. Yes, the guy had physical skills. He was athletic. He had a great horse and he had a lot of practice. But that was true of most of the good competitors there. But what he brought to the party on top of that was a habit of, he would create this mental game plan of how things should go. He'd go study his steer. I called it a bull. He's like, it's a steer, Jeanette. Okay, I'm learning these things. He would go study his steer about how he moved and what his demeanor was. And based on what he was picking up, he would create a visualization. He just would see things going how he wanted them to go. He'd see things going according to plan. In fact, that's what he told his son when his son started competing. He said, you've got to see it how you want it to go. You cannot imagine what might go wrong. Hello, that's exactly what we're doing, right? But he did more than that. He also got serenely focused when it was time to compete. Like he put everything else out of his head, especially other competitors who had really good runs before him. He said a lot of guys would get psyched out when someone would do really well and they'd just mentally give up after that. In fact, he said it happened to him on occasion, but most of the time he was really good about putting all of that behind him. Like the past didn't exist anymore. It was a clean slate. And that, I think I've done it my own self where I've been focused on manifesting something until I'm not focused on it anymore. I'm off in the weeds and I'm thinking about how it's not going to go right. This guy, super dialed in. He also had a lot of confidence in his horse. He had a really good horse and, that just added to his reasons to believe that he was a regular winner. And when he didn't win, he would just shrug it off. He wouldn't go into slumps. He wouldn't dwell on it. He wouldn't make that part of his new story. He'd just shrug it off and say, there's another rodeo tomorrow. Losses didn't weigh on him. I think that's another key point that I picked up from what he described, in that sometimes we tend to ruminate on those things. Like if we're dating and we have a bad date and we keep thinking about that, or if we had a job interview that didn't go well, or if something's going wrong in our relationship, we sometimes can get focused on the contrast rather than just finding a way to shrug it off and move on and stay focused on what we want. What I would add to his recipe for success is that he had a really supportive story about himself. Like over time, he developed this expectation of winning. And that helps a lot when you think of yourself that way, when your identity is, just like he said, when I showed up, people knew I would win their money. That can't hurt when you know yourself that way, because whatever we know, it's coming to fruition. So that element of his self-identity, I think, helped him quite a bit as well. And that's probably one he developed over time. But you know what else he had going for him? He loved what he was doing. Absolutely loved it, which boggles my mind. But yeah, that's a big factor too when we're doing what we love. So I'm sharing this because someone asked. I'd mentioned it in a prior podcast, but I thought there's also tips that we could glean. This guy doesn't even consider himself a conscious creator. Like, I would probably in normal life refer to him as a muggle, but he isn't. That's probably not fair. He's just one of those people we run across. Some of you are married to people like this, or you have family members or children who are just really natural manifestors. Even they might not have the lingo for it. They might not think of it as working the system. They just know what works and they do it, and it's really natural for them. This guy is clearly one of those. In fact, remember the podcast where I was talking about this? He was telling me about how he was such a good winner, and I didn't get too many details from him then, but I said, dude, you could totally use this skill in other areas of life. And that's where I pointed out to him some other areas where he could use those skills. And he did. And he got amazing results. So I don't have any business referring to him as a muggle, even if he wouldn't self-identify as a conscious creator. He's clearly someone who's plugged in and using it to his best benefit. And I thought, however we might glean any tips from his experience, let's do that. So that's the answer to the question that was in my inbox about how that friend of mine was such a regular winner at the rodeo. Hope you found that helpful. I've got a sleeping kitty in my lap, but my legs are starting to fall asleep. I'm going to try to record one more before I got to wake him up. Thanks for listening, everyone.